Visit with us. Moving right along, we have call on Carol Godwin again for the nominating committee. And I would like to call on Andy Lee, the book editing committee. He just...
Thank you, Della. We have a wonderful program for this evening. Jake Crim, who has lived in Tyler most of his life and has been in banking and investment all his life. He and Margaret, his wife, have 2 children and 3 grandchildren. Jake is one of the founders of the Fire Historical Society and has been researching at great length over a long period of time, very much in depth, about Tyler, its fires, its great fire chief, all of its equipment, all of the very funny things that have happened down the years, and all of the very exciting things, not all of them, but I think you're going to learn some very interesting things, and I believe that David has brought some people with him tonight. So I'm going to turn our program over to David.
Thank you for inviting me. I grew up right up the street here on Elm Street, 300 block. And back at that time, the Tyler Fire Department made an awful lot of runs up Elm Street. The old central station was located on West Locust in the 200 block. Can you hear me all right? Is that okay? The old central fire station was located in the 200 block of West Locust. Many times they'd make a run down Board Arc, take the turn on the West Elm, and then they'd gun it up West Elm. And the sights and sounds of those old fire engines were something to behold. And the first red lights Tyler had on fire engines, they had 2 trucks. Each one of them had a red headlight. I never will forget that. That was the first red lights on Tyler fire engines. From the time I was about this tall, my dad, someone in the family, would take me down to Central Fire Station. At some point in time, I've got a very strong suspicion that maybe they made a run, and firing those trucks up, I probably cried. And maybe from that point on, maybe I was living dangerously being around them. I'm not sure. But anyway, something lodged in my mind about these old fire engines. I've always been totally fascinated. And we're the East Texas Historical Fire Society. And we actually started in operation about 1983. And there were actually 5 of us that started. My son, Earl Crim, he was sort of the ringleader. He's the guy that started the whole thing. David Slottick, the late Paul Kelly, Bill Wheelis, and myself. And at that time, our motivation was to collect Tyler Fire memorabilia. At that time, Earl and I had 1 fire engine. And we set out to collect as much Tyler Fire memorabilia as we could, fire history, not only Tyler, but East Texas, but mainly in Tyler. And that's how we started. We, at the present time, have 20 pieces of fire equipment that belong to either directly to the society or its members. All of these will be available to go in the East Texas Fire Museum, which we propose to establish here in Tyler. Of the 20 pieces of fire equipment that we have, 10 of these are Tyler equipment, ranging in vintage from 1916 to 1967, plus an awful lot of memorabilia, fire department records, this sort of thing, old newspaper articles regarding old fires, all sorts of documentation. And this is sort of going together tonight to give you just a little bit of a bird's eye view of the Tyler Fire Department from the year 1900 to 1950. This is taken from the actual fire records or interviews with old-time firemen, their families, that sort of thing. So that's sort of our background for the documentation that I'll be going into tonight. The East Texas Historical Fire Society is a 501c3 corporation, and we're at this time trying to find a building for the purpose of establishing an antique fire museum. And we feel like this will be an excellent opportunity for Tyler citizens to view Tyler's fire history, as well as an attraction for out-of-town people coming into Tyler. And I might mention also that there are a number of excellent fire museums around the country, but we are not aware of any that have 10 pieces of local fire equipment to be on display. This includes Dallas, Houston, Shreveport, New York City, San Francisco, or Chicago. If there are any around, frankly, we're not aware of it. So this is sort of where we're going. And one of the offshoots of this, we're actually going to be writing a detailed history of the Tyler Fire Department. And what I'll be going into tonight is just a very slight bit of that history, give you just a sort of slight overview. Back in 1900, the Tyler Fire Department had two pieces of equipment. There was a chemical engine with two 35-gallon soda acid tanks and a hose wagon that carried 1,000 feet of hose. Both of them were pulled by two horses. In 1907, there was another hose rig added, purchased from Seagrave for a total cost of $675. And in 1912, Tyler added a horse-drawn ladder rig that was acquired from Corsicana secondhand. Corsicana bought a new one and sold theirs to Tyler without any ladders. Tyler bought the ladders from American Lafrance for $600, excuse me. That gives you a little bit of background on the original horse-drawn apparatus. The water system in 1900 was privately owned by the Tyler Water Company. The fire plugs were leased by the city at a cost of $4,000 a year. The first fire that I wanted to get into occurred December 13, 1903. This was the Fruit Palace building, is what it was actually called, but it was occupied by the Tyler College, which was a predecessor of the Tyler Commercial College. This building was located on West Front, immediately east of where Borden's is now. This was a huge two-story wooden structure that at one time had a 5,000-seat auditorium inside. And at the time it burned, it was being used as a school and as a dormitory for Tyler College students and the faculty. And this fire occurred about 8 o'clock in the morning on a Sunday, and the building burned down to the ground in 35 minutes from the time the fire was reported. The second fire that I want to mention, this was probably the largest residential fire that ever occurred in Tyler. The block directly across from the First Baptist Church on Ferguson Street. This was bounded by Ferguson on the north, Woldert on the south, Bonner on the west, and Irwin on the south, or Bonner on the west and Irwin on the south. The fire started about 3 o'clock in the morning, and before it was over, there were a total of 9 houses destroyed, plus all of the barns and outbuildings and all of the structures. And And of course, back in these days, everything was had wooden construction, shingle roofs, a lot of wood piles, this sort of thing, hay in the barns. This whole thing went very quickly. And total loss was estimated in 1906 to be approximately $100,000. And these were at that time fine homes. They were all huge two-story residences. And if you translate that into current dollars, well, that would be a multi-million-dollar fire in all likelihood today. And it would appear that this is the largest residential fire Tyler ever had. That fire and one that occurred in 1907 on April the 6th is probably what triggered Tyler going to the paid fire department. On April the 6th, 1907, between 12 and 1 o'clock a.m., the Opera House burned on South Spring. Now, this was immediately south of Irwin Street on the east side of the block, along about midways in the block where the jail is now. And this was a 3-story structure, and the fire originated in the area of the stage and the dressing rooms. Very quickly, the fire spread throughout the building. The building collapsed. And when it did, there was a 4-inch water line under the building that no one knew anything about. This water line ruptured, and when that occurred, then that pretty well cut out all the water pressure to all the fire plugs in the area. And the fire department did not have any pressure to fight the fire with. The fire spread to the building on the corner of Spring and Irwin, occupied by the commercial club on the lower floor, the Elks Club on the upper floor, and immediately east there's a grocery store and some offices. And this whole thing burned pretty quickly. The total loss was estimated to be about $65,000. Now, let me go back just a minute, too, to this fire I mentioned a minute ago on the block on Ferguson. Ironically, there were 2 other fires in this same area. One occurred, the first actually occurred between 1899 and 1900. The date on this is a little bit questionable. Nobody knows for sure. But either in 1899 or 1900, there were 5 houses and related buildings that burned on this block at that time. Also again, on June 27, 1911, fire again struck this same block. This time it was pretty much at the eastern end and wiped out houses on the east end of Ferguson and a couple of houses also on Woldert Street. The Baptist parsonage was threatened, and they managed to take all the furniture out of the parsonage, but they did stop the fire before it got to that. But anyway, I should have mentioned that a minute ago when I was talking about this one in 1906. But this actually set in motion, in all likelihood, the Tyler Fire Department going to on a paid basis in 1908. And I might mention now at this time, too, all Tyler had were these hose rigs. There were no pumpers at all. A lot of people envision the horse-drawn fire equipment. You can see the pumper with the smoke coming out of the smokestack, and Tyler never had any such thing. All they had to rely on was the water pressure out of the fire plugs. But January the 1st, 1908, Tyler actually had 2 fire departments. What had been the volunteer fire department was sort of restructured. The chief had been J.H. Bothwell of the volunteer fire department. He became president of the new volunteer fire department. The paid Tyler Fire Department went into operation under the direction of Mr. J.J. Daglish. He had been chief on 2 occasions of the volunteer fire department earlier, and he became the chief of the new paid department in 1908, January the 1st, he and 5 men. The paid fire department was supplemented by the assistance from the volunteer fire department. The difference in the volunteers at this time was that the volunteers were paid volunteers. This is to say that each fire that they worked, they were paid $2 each per fire. And obviously a fire of any size, a chief and 5 men couldn't handle it. So the volunteers, paid volunteers, were a very necessary part of that. I might mention that going on down the line with the paid volunteers, now the paid volunteer department pretty well disappeared about World War I time. I'm not sure just exactly when they went out of existence, but it looked like it's about 1918, 19 along in there. But in effect, there was a type of paid volunteer department that was reinitiated in the 30s and on up in the 50s, as far as that's concerned. What they did, they set up a group of what were called extra firemen. And they were paid not by the city, but by the firemen. There were about 5 or 6 of them in this group, depending on the time you're talking about. They were actually hired by the fire chief. In fact, the way they were handled was if a fireman wanted to take some time off, he could get one of the extra firemen to work for him. And they were paid, depending on the time element you're talking about, 10 or 15 cents an hour plus $2 per fire. So back to $2 again per fire. And this went on for a substantial period of time. And I might add that a number of the actual Tyler firemen came in through this basis. They started to work as extra firemen. At some point in time, when an opening presented itself on the fire department, they went to regular fireman status, and I know of at least 2 of them that ended up being very fine fire chiefs for the city of Tyler later on. One story that keeps popping up I want to mention is fire horses buried in Oakwood Cemetery. And we hear lots of tales about that from time to time, and it's a good story. And it may be true. And if anybody can give us some kind of documentation on there concerning that, we would love to have it. Fire horses were dearly loved, no question about that. And it's very likely that may be the case. But we've talked to people and we've not been able actually to see anything in writing that would substantiate it. But if there is anything like that, we certainly would love to have it. One fire, I'm going to mention a couple of fires here. I'll tell you one thing, one of the toughest things done getting ready for this program was trying to work out the time element and come up with which fires not to talk about. This has been my problem. Tyler has had so many major fires, and I tell you, we could be here all night and part of tomorrow if we talked about all of them. And what I've tried to do is go through and sort of come up with some that I think might be of the most interest to this group. So if I'm missing a fire that some of you think I ought to talk about, well, I hope you'll understand what I'm doing. February 15, 1909. This is in the middle of the block where the federal building is located now in West Ferguson. Brown's Bookstore, Banner State Telephone Company, Myron Smith Shoe Department, and several offices that were upstairs in that area over Brown's Bookstore. The fire started in a storage area on the 2nd floor. This is 10 o'clock at night. The Banner State Telephone Company had a number of operators on duty up there operating the switchboards. And the fire spread very rapidly, and the operators, at this time they were called phonists, and I don't think I've ever run across that term before, but the telephone operator were known as phonists. Anyway, there was a lot of smoke in the hallways, and they couldn't get out. And they ended up going out onto a fixed awning on the front of their office on the 2nd floor, and ladders were raised, and they were brought down these ladders. That's how they escaped. It could have been a quite serious situation. But anyway, it turned out it wasn't. It worked out all right. No one was seriously injured in the occurrence. One thing that keeps popping up: Tyler citizens love to go to fires. One thing I didn't mention: now this fire was at 10 o'clock at night. It was sleeting and snowing, and newspaper accounts state that there were hundreds of Tyler citizens watching the fire in the sleet and snow. And I bumped into this on a number of articles about major fires. People just come downtown to watch the fires. It's pretty, I guess it's a good form of entertainment. Chief Daglish had a term for these folks. He called them curbstone firemen. And that may be a little bit akin to armchair quarterbacks. Now, I'm not sure, but anyway, that was his term to describe them. On November 14th, 1910, this is over on North Broadway, the first block off the square on the east side. This was an area that was occupied by Parker and Pinkerton's Grocery, Courier Times, Crutcher Feed and Grain, Tyler Electric, Light Plant Wholesale, or Warehouse. The fire was reported about 2 o'clock in the morning. It was discovered by passengers that had gotten off a Cotton Belt train. And apparently the fire started at the rear of the Parker and Pinkerton store and very quickly spread to all of these buildings. And in turn, there's one or two buildings over on Spring Street that were severely damaged also. The newspaper was wiped out. And those of us interested in Tyler history, we found out that there were 15 years of Tyler newspapers going back from 1910 that were destroyed. The newspaper did manage to go ahead and print that same day. They made arrangements with another printing company in Tyler and didn't miss a lick on getting out the newspapers. But that was a sort of serious, from our standpoint now, the folks who are interested in Tyler history, well, that was a pretty tough situation for us. And this fire amounted to about $60,000 in damage. Now I'm going to kind of skip through several fires, and I'm going to go to August of 1916. And this would involve Tyler's purchase of 2 pieces of motorized fire equipment. At this time, motorized fire engines were generally referred to as auto fire machines. Tyler purchased 2 fire engines from American Lafrance. If you look at this photograph right here, on the left is Tyler's original engine 1. This is 1916 American Lafrance, purchase price $9,000. Next to that is a Type 40 American Lafrance that was purchased for $5,800. And engine 1's a Type 45. I'm going to elaborate on that just a little bit. American Lafrance started a new series of fire apparatus in December of 1915. The first one went to Chicago. Tyler received the 22nd Type 45 built. This was the first one sold in the state of Texas. Now the Type 45 was to become a very, very popular big city fire engine. It was a 1,000-gallon-a-minute pumper and had sort of a souped-up engine to operate that particular pump. And a few years later, this was going to be a piece of equipment that was bought by many of the big city departments in quite a bit of volume. In about 1925-6, Philadelphia turned in an order for 32 of them. And other big cities had quite a few of them too. But Tyler was very, very proud of these new pieces of fire equipment. On Friday afternoon, August the 18th, there was a demonstration and certification held on the square, on the north side of the square, the intersection of North Broadway, and Ferguson Street. All the Tyler citizens were invited to come. There were a number of fire chiefs from other Texas cities that were here to view the demonstration. Quite a few demonstrations were conducted on the square. There was a drafting certification test performed somewhere down here on College Street. We don't know just where that was. But as a part of this demonstration on the square, this Type 45 American Lafrance threw a stream of water clear over the dome of the courthouse. And I tell you folks, that thing would suck the water mains right up out of the street. There was something to see. Quite a few of the Tyler citizens didn't see it because they're working and so forth. And arrangements were made for another demonstration. Incidentally, the Tyler Volunteer Fire Department put on a dinner for the visiting fire officials from out of town that night, on the Friday night. And one of those present was Assistant Chief of the Dallas Fire Department, Tom Myers, who later was to become Chief of the Dallas Fire Department, one of the most highly regarded fire chiefs in the country. And his comments after these tests were conducted was that this Type 45 either met or exceeded all of his expectations. The test was very successful in every regard. Another demonstration was set up at Hills Auditorium out here in the hospital area for Monday night at 8 o'clock the following week. The Tyler Traction Company, the streetcar line, ran extra streetcars out there to enable Tyler citizens to go out and see the demonstration. Pumping demonstrations were put on out there for about an hour, giving all those who had not seen it previously an opportunity to observe it. And the tests were very, very successful, and the Tyler citizens were very, very proud of their new fire equipment. And I might mention that there was an article in the Tyler paper just a few days after this, on August the 23rd, that arrangements had been made for Dallas to have certification tests on a Type 45 to be placed in a new fire station in Dallas. So Tyler got the first one in the state of Texas. Dallas got the second one. And I was asked a question the other day, and I hadn't thought about this, frankly. How many of these Type 45s are in existence now? And we're members of an organization called SPAMFA, which means the Society of the Preservation and Appreciation of Antique Motorized Fire Apparatus in America. And this has a listing of all the membership, all of the equipment that they own. And I checked out the current list that just came out here several months ago for this year. And at the present time, there are 31 Type 45 American Lafrances shown to be in existence by SPAMFA members. And in all likelihood, there may be another 4 or 5 more that are not listed with SPAMFA. But looking at this list, Tyler's Type 45 is the oldest in existence. And in all likelihood, that will hold up, being as it was the 22nd one built. And this apparatus is presently awaiting restoration. And hopefully it will be the centerpiece of our East Texas Fire Museum. And we're going to put that in, probably about 2 down the line right now in our restoration program. It'll be coming up here hopefully before too long. And we're going to ask Tyler citizens to participate in this restoration with us by donations. And I assure you it will, at some point in time, be able to throw a stream of water over the courthouse dome again. Of course, I guess we'll have to substitute something for the courthouse dome. But anyway, trust me, it will be able to do that again. One thing I probably ought to do is a little show and tell. A couple of things here, items I want to tell you just a little bit about. This is a Dietz Fire King lantern. This was pretty well the standard of all fire departments around the country. They were used here in Tyler for many, many years, both on horse-drawn and early motorized fire equipment. The brackets were on the side of the apparatus. The way these were used at night, just about dusk, they would light them up, turn them on very low, and leave them in the brackets on the side of the apparatus. And if they had to make a run during the night, they were already lighted and ready to go. And all they had to do when they got to the fire or got ready to use them was to turn them up. The next morning, you'd shut them off, clean them up, refill them, be ready to go again. That was pretty well the standard lantern in use for many, many years. I think Tyler used those probably up until the early to mid-30s, somewhere in that range. Also, this is a Babcock fire extinguisher, and like the Dietz in many respects, this was pretty well the standard for many, many years. Looking at the old photographs of Tyler apparatus, horse-drawn and motorized, you can see the Babcock extinguisher mounted on the side of those rigs. The old Tyler fire reports gave details on all of Tyler's fires. There's a space on there for gallons of water used, footage of ladder used, all types of information, the cause of the fire. The space on there that you would think would say fire extinguishers used said Babcock's used. That's how standard they were here in Tyler. And talking about the old fire reports, I might mention this. They also had a place on the report for fire plugs. And they would indicate on there where the plug was that was used for a particular fire. Some of these were named. They didn't put a location on there, they put a name. The intersection of Broadway and Front was the Crutcher plug. The plug on Ferguson Street, sort of southwest and across the street from the City Hall, was the Starley plug. And everybody that needed to know the plugs that were used, they could look at this name and they'd know exactly where that was. This was not done in all cases, but a lot of instances that was done. That's sort of interesting to me that that's the way they did it. And that went on for many, many years. In 1923, July 1923, Tyler bought another American Lafrance fire engine. This was to replace this four-cylinder type 40 here in the middle of the picture. And this was a 750-gallon-a-minute pumper that was bought. It was a demonstrator in the American Lafrance sales office in Dallas. Purchase price was $12,500. Tyler was allowed $1,500 trade-in, and a net cash outlay, of course, being $11,000. And the one tale that was told for many years, that particular truck made a run up to Mineola. 1926, had a major fire downtown, and that truck made the run 30 miles in 35 minutes. And the men that made that run were very, very proud of that. That was talked about for many, many years around the Tyler Fire Department. Tyler had many, many fires in the 1920s. It'd be hard to name an area on the square that didn't have a fire, frankly. Just about all of them had a fire of pretty serious consequences. One fire in the 1920s that I do want to mention, this is probably the most talked about fire Tyler ever had, both in the fire department and Tyler citizens. Matter of fact, some people that knew I was going to make this talk said, "You are going to talk about the Woldert fire, aren't you?" I said, "Yes." So on the morning of December 31st, 1927, about 5 o'clock in the morning, about 5:30 in the morning, it was around 0. Very, very cold weather. There's a fire reported at the Woldert Peanut Products Company. That's what it was called in those days. This was located on West Irwin on the north side and the south side being on West Elm, bordered on the west by Palace, on the east by the Cotton Belt High Line tracks. This building was part 2-story and part 1-story brick and contained a large volume of peanuts, pecans, that sort of thing in large bins. And this building was pretty well involved when the fire department ran on the scene. They couldn't put it out. It was so cold, the tops of these piles of nuts would ice over when the water hit them, and the fire was down inside of it. And they had a very, very difficult time putting this fire out. Chief Burns recounted later on that this was the toughest fire that he had ever fought. And our engine 1, the Type 45 that I mentioned a while ago, it pumped 12 hours straight without ever shutting down. And the firemen had ice all over their coats. The helmets were all completely iced over. And this was a tough fire. Estimated loss was somewhere between $100,000 and $170,000. Due to all of the fires that Tyler had in the 20s, insurance rates necessitated that Tyler buy additional fire equipment. In October 1930, they bought a Seagrave Suburbanite, which is engine 5. November 1930, they bought number 6, which was a Type 19 Mack. The East Irwin Fire Station was opened up December 1st, 1930, and part of the same situation to alleviate the insurance rate situation was Tyler had to increase the manpower of the fire department. So Tyler was up to 18 men now in the fire department. And I might mention at the time of the Woldert Company fire, Tyler had 13 firemen. That included the fire chief and the fire marshal. And a little bit later on, this situation evolved that I mentioned a while ago with extra firemen. And back in those days, whenever a fireman was off, he had to stay in Tyler. They couldn't leave. There was a blackboard hanging on a post in the old central station. And at one time, one man could leave Tyler at a time when he was off duty. If his name was on that blackboard, he could leave town. Later on, that was expanded to 2 men. So when they were off duty, they still had to be available to make fires that were of major consequence. In the 1930s, Tyler had a large number of arson fires. And I'm pretty well going to skip this because this is going to be covered in an upcoming article in the Smith County Chronicles, I believe next year when that's going to come about. So I'm going to sort of stay away from all that. One fire I am going to mention about this time though. On August 8th, 1936, about 5:30 in the afternoon, this was a Sunday afternoon, there's a fire reported in a restroom of Kids Cafe on the south side of the square. A few minutes later, a fire was reported above my wife's father's drugstore, Hicks Drugs, on the northeast corner of the square. This was in a hallway upstairs. A few minutes later, a fire was reported in a storage area in the Sunday school building of Marvin Church. All 3 of these fires were successfully knocked out without any damage. What was happening was that waste baskets were being placed in isolated areas with a lot of trash in them, and the trash set on fire. Fortunately, the fire department got there in time and put them out. One of them was not that successful. And apparently, while the fire department was at Marvin Church, there was a fire started on West Ferguson Street. Now I'm across the street from a federal building now. This is between Nations Bank building and Nations Bank parking building, sort of in the middle of the block on the south side of Ferguson. On the ground floor was Western Union and Singer Sewing Machine. Upstairs was a dress shop, Ellick Woldert Company, and an architect's office. And this fire was started in a closet up there in this area, and it would appear that the fire department first knew about this while they were still at Marvin Church Sunday School. And it had a pretty good jump on them. And it got up into the roof and took off after that. However, it was confined to that one building. There's an alleyway on the west side. On the east, apparently, was a pretty good firewall. The entire second story was demolished. The ground floor pretty well just had water and smoke damage. But if you think about it, if all of these fires had managed to take off, downtown Tyler could very easily have been demolished because they couldn't handle it. But fortunately, that wasn't the case. No one was ever apprehended for causing any of these fires. In 1939, let me bring up this picture over here. This is what was known as the Elks Club fire. That occurred about 6:30 in the morning on June 27, 1939. And the engine there in the center of that picture is Tyler Engine 2. That's the second Engine 2 that Tyler had. That's the one that I mentioned that was purchased for $12,500. And that truck is in the process of being totally restored right now. And it will be like a brand new American Lafrance fire engine here, hopefully in the not too distant future. Tyler was doing some serious considering for additional fire stations at this time. And World War II was coming along. There's a lot of concern in the early 40s about manpower for the fire station, for the fire department. During this time, Tyler placed in effect another type of volunteer firemen. Now, they had 52 of them that were listed in the records that were available for being called to assist. They trained every Friday night, and this was made up of high school age boys clear on up into middle to senior citizens, just anyone that would be interested in assisting the fire department. And what was interesting to note that one of the men listed as one of these volunteers was one of the original paid Tyler firemen. And he came back as a volunteer fireman during World War II. And records show that they were used on 2 or 3 fires. There was a substantial fire in the cotton compress out on Oakwood and Palace Street. They were on the scene 19 hours. There's another fire broke out while that one was going on, so they had 2 fires going at one time. This was in January 10, 1942. Probably the volunteers were involved there. We don't have that in our records. There was a major fire out at a dormitory out at Butler College, and evidence does indicate that volunteers were out there helping out. What had occurred, quite a few of the Tyler firemen went to the military. Some went out to Camp Fannin. They manned the fire department out of Camp Fannin during the war. Some went into war work. So there was a need for volunteer firemen to assist the fire department during that time also. I'm sort of running out of time. I want to mention 1 or 2 other things. I'm going to shut up. In 1949, June of 1949, there was a fire station opened out on Glenwood Boulevard and 4th Street, in that area out there. And I failed to mention that in October 43, there was a fire station opened up out on North College. And those of you that went to the fair probably saw the little truck that was in service most of the time. It was with the Tyler Fire Department, was out there on North College. This was 1942 Dodge Darley that we have completely restored, and it was on display out at the fair. Tyler bought a Mac to be used in the station on Glenwood. This was known as Tyler number 3 station. Later on, that was to become station number 5 when they did some rescheduling and they had another station in there. I'm just about at the end of this thing right now. There really weren't any major fires in 1949 to 50. In 1950, total fire losses were $105,297. So actually, there were not that many fire losses during the year. I'd like to recognize a few people. Is Ms. Louise Harris here? I don't see her. Okay. Well, I want to recognize the president of our organization, David Slottick, is Chief of Training for the Tyler Fire Department. Stand up, David. And my son, Earl Crim, he's the vice president, and those two guys, they pretty well run our operation. They take care of things. And Chief Tom Mooney, the Tyler Fire Department. Tom, appreciate you being here. I hope am I missing somebody? Mary? I didn't. Where are you? Mary, I didn't see you. Excuse me. Okay. Mary Kelly. This is the wife of Paul Kelly, who was one of our founding members. I didn't see you come in, Mary. We lost Paul back in 1987. And there's signs of Paul Kelly all over our place out there right now. You have to know where to look, but it's there. Mary, glad to see you. If we have, are there any questions or any comments? We'd be glad to try to answer any questions if anybody has any.
Why did they name the fire plugs? Were they after people or?
I can't tell you. I don't know. Sometimes you could relate it to property owners in the area. Sometimes you couldn't. I don't know. That's a question that I'd love to know the answer to. I can't. I don't know. I'm very curious about that. But they all knew exactly where to look. I mean, if it was this plug, you know, that told you exactly where it was. You know, no question about it. Everybody knew about it. Yes, sir.
I tell you how, Nathan, they named it.
Russell?
Live right there. Crutcher lives up here, and they named that. They were right Crutcher. That was out of those names. He had one today somewhere from first walk away plug.
Well, this is Russell Hawkins. Russell was with the fire department for many, many years, and he knows an awful lot of Tyler fire history. Were most of them named for property owners, Russell? Is that the way you took it? Okay. Well, some of them I was able to tie into property owners and some not. So, but that makes sense, being that way. Yes, sir.
Where exactly was this fire station located? You have a picture there where the bus station is?
It's where the Nations Bank drive-in is. The address was actually 203 West Locust. And it's the Nations Bank drive-in, or right behind the bus station.
So it would be east of the present bus station?
Right,
What year was that built?
That was built in 1886. And we've got a little story about this, because I know the way this organization feels about the courthouse. Well, we've got our feelings about the old Central Fire Station. It kind of fits the same category. But that's where it was. We have some membership applications and some information pertaining to a muster that we have coming up on October the 24th. This is our annual fundraiser out at Lake Palestine. And if any of you would like to participate with us in membership or participate in our muster, well, we would love to have you. There'll be some of us around to answer any question if any of you'd like to get any more information on it. Thank you.
David, that was very interesting. I enjoyed it immensely. How about y'all?
Good job.
I think David needs to put some chronicles about all of that. There being no other business, if there is no other business, is there any other